I had spent so much of my life trying to get approval from other people.
Whenever I was in school, it was like making lots of money made me look cool. And I wanted that status too. I wanted people to come to me for advice. I'm good at making lots of money because I have mental toughness, but I'm coping a weaker part of my personality, which was the vulnerable long-term relationships, for example, right?
And he said, hey, I just wanted you to know that was one of the best conversations I've ever had. And it was hilarious because the whole time we're talking about him, but it forms the habit and people really, really appreciate it because it's so rare that people actually ask someone how they're doing.
How do you maximize your time? Everyone's got 24 hours. You're a very successful entrepreneur owning, grit and running all these different businesses that you've done in the past. What do you think is the biggest mistake a college student makes with their schedule, and how do you spend your time?
Yeah, I would say, the biggest thing for me, like every morning I get up, the kids go off to school, and then I work out every single day, during the weekday at least. So for me, I think working out is a total game changer. It is absolutely a total game changer. Being able to break a sweat, push yourself. For me, I typically do like 30 minutes of some type of intense cardio. So I'll do like running on Mondays. I'll do like a 30-minute P90X workout on Tuesdays. Wednesdays I did a bike for like 25 minutes, and I'll do like 25 different sets of weights. And then I'll swim on Fridays. So, for me, I think having cardio, you look at, we've interviewed a lot of different doctors on our podcast, and the biggest thing they found with COVID was that people that were overweight were the ones at highest risk. So I think being in good physical condition. So I'd say working out obviously is a big part of my schedule that I think really makes me effective. Number two is, during the weekdays, like I'm very diligent about what I eat, like salads, fruits, vegetables, the amount I eat, I really watch. And then on the weekends can kind of do whatever I want. So if I, overindulge a little bit or, have a hamburger or whatever. So I kind of use the weekends to kind of do, what I want in terms of food and that kind of thing. But really during the week, just really try and watch that. Getting plenty of sleep. So every night, I carve out 20 to 30 minutes to read right when I get in bed. So I think having that time away from your screen is super important. You're filling your brain with whatever it is you're reading. For me, it's always some type of business or motivational book that I'm reading, but then getting really, really good night's sleep too, investing in a good pillow, good sheets, good comforter. So I think getting really, really good sleep is important. Having a habit of having healthy relationships. And I'll say this, I think one of the biggest things that really kind of unlocked everything for me, I was around age 30 when this happened, but I was starting to notice a trend is that a lot of the same types of issues professionally and personally with relationships with people were kind of starting to recur over and over again. And somebody put me onto the wisdom of the Enneagram, which is basically, it's a personality assessment. There's like 9 different personality types. They've got a free quiz online. But for me, what it did is really help me understand who I was, how I'm motivated. And in that Enneagram, I'm a type 3, which is an achiever. And I had been very caught up in what other people's opinions were. And for me at age 30, that was an aha moment. I had spent so much of my life trying to get approval from other people that I was never getting, and I was never gonna get it. And so for me, that's when I really started to run my own race. And I think for me, it helped me professionally. It helped me with all of my relationships. Because now I had an awareness of it. I had an awareness of what were some of the pitfalls of my personality that sometimes I just needed to recognize it and stop doing it. And I think the sooner that you can figure those things out, because look, the reality of it is this, I don't care what your background was, but everybody has a mom issue and a dad issue, right? If they were a great parent, you're going to have an issue of trying to live up to that or trying to continue to look for that. If you had a bad parent, then you're trying to find it so there's just certain things about our personality that if you recognize it, unpack some of those issues that you have, it's really going to help you in future relationships, especially when you get into dating. And if you're bringing your own baggage from being a teenager into a new relationship, that's really going to hold back your relationship from getting to the next level. And it's really going to hold you back when you get into having kids and in-laws and everything else. So again, I think there's, for me, the wisdom of the Enneagram was really, really super impactful. I mean, I can't really overstate how impactful impactful that was for me, not only professionally, but personally, and as a father and all the other relationships that I deal with. So, I mean, you can spend $5,000 and go to Tony Robbins and unpack a little bit of that kind of stuff. And, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of people that can help you kind of go and address some of the issues. And I'm super confident that whether you had a good parents or bad parents, that you still are going to have things that you need to work through and talk through, and really just understand about yourself. And because there's definitely some things from your past that are going to be holding you back from your full potential.
Absolutely. So I think if you want to maximize college, right? I mean, there's so much good content here, but I think understanding yourself, right? Understanding why you do what you do is a big question that you want to figure out as quickly as possible. It's just understanding, becoming more self-aware of how you tick, because I think a lot of people, they'll end up doing stuff for a huge portion of their life and they don't even realize why they're doing it, or they don't realize the things that are going on in the back of their mind, of like, oh, I want other people's approval. So then I, do whatever it takes to get that approval. And then we don't realize maybe that's not like the healthiest thing, right? I also think, go ahead.
Oh, no. And I love what you're saying there too, because I think, because talking about social media, and this kind of ties back into it of like people that, feel bad about not making as much money, but like, why is it that you think you need to make a lot of money? And what is it you think making a lot of money is going to get you? And really start to understand not only why you think it, but what has led you up to that. And once you can kind of realize that, then you're going to care a lot less about what other people think.
Yeah, no, that's great, right? Because usually like what I've struggled with, whenever I was in school was like making lots of money made me look cool. It made people look up to me. And I wanted that status. I wanted to be well liked. I wanted to be, looked up to. I wanted people to come to me for advice. And when you kind of think about it that way, it was like, that's kind of like an egotistical, narcissistic way of thinking about money. And if that's the only reason you're making it, then you'll do whatever to get the money, get that dopamine release, right? To where people will come to you. But are you really building and developing relationships? And maybe quite possibly I was doing that because I was an introvert and I wanted an excuse for people to come talk to me, because possibly maybe I struggled with deep, vulnerable connections, right? And those are things I discovered about myself, right? And you're like, oh, I'm basically coping. I'm good at making lots of money because I have mental toughness, but I'm coping a weaker part of my personality, which was the vulnerable long-term relationships, for example, right? And it's crazy when you get into it deep like that, you're going to have these moments that you're like, whoa. And I think when you figure those things out, it just takes all this pressure off. You're like, oh, okay, cool. It's still, some things still hurt, right? But it's like, oh, okay, I don't need everyone to like me, and I remember going through a phase of life, and this is when I was selling books and stuff. I had these, phases where I would say, what, this next 6 months, I'm literally just going to be unashamedly myself and not care what anyone thinks. And if they like me, great. If they want to be my friends, great. Those will be quality friends. And if they don't, they're probably not going to be quality friends that I need to be spending time with anyway.
Yeah. Well, and Joe, kind of to your point earlier about people not knowing or really caring at a certain point where you went to college. So this might blow your mind, but it has been in the last 15 years, not one person has ever asked me how much money I made.
Wow.
About that.
That's great.
My son asked me, he's like 14. He had asked me like kind of a ballpark range, which I thought it would be, whatever. But think about that. In 15 years, nobody's even asked how much money I made. So again, it goes back to the fact that and you think about the reason it's people don't really care. I hate to say it in a bad way, but people really don't care how much money you make. And then B, people don't really want to know how much money you make because kind of to your point, they either don't want to feel bad about it or whatever it may be. It doesn't even matter what the reason is, but that's the reality of it is nobody ever cares once you get to a certain point how much money you make. And I think once people realize that, it's like, well, then don't make that your whole purpose for why you do what you do. You know what I mean? Because then I think people get frustrated because they're like, oh, well, if I do make a bunch of money and nobody's asking, then I'm not being validated, right? Which means you're kind of basing it on the wrong things. So it is kind of interesting how all that works.
Yeah. It's a weird thing to wrap your mind around, is that if I do these things, people will look up to me. But then thinking about the authenticity of the relationship, well, are they looking up to you because you've just accomplished things or because they actually just care about you as a person, right? Yeah. And in life, you're going to have different relationships as you do more impressive things or whatever and achieve different goals. You always have people look up to you for different reasons. But I think really the deep down thing of what everyone really wants is actually just the authentic, relationships that help them feel really happy in their life and feel joyful for who they know, So yeah, absolutely. I think those are all huge. And if you can figure that out really early, I mean, obviously if you figure that out before 30, even I'm sure you already knew a bunch of that type of stuff in your 20s, but the earlier you can figure that out, the more, joyful you're going to feel, because then you're not going to be sort of restricted. So I think that's great. I think that's a really solid thing that most people don't think about. It's something someone told me to start thinking about that when I was doing the Southwestern internship. I don't even actually remember who, but someone, when I must have been trying to be a leader for the first time and then realizing all of these weird things that I do. I remember one time recounting my day of all the stuff that I did to my leader one time. And it was like all results, because I'm a 3 as well, by the way.
Oh, nice. There you go.
I'm a big 3, and so 3s on the Enneagram are really achiever based. They want to hit goals. They like the numbers. They like seeing the numbers increase, and they'll do whatever it takes to make them increase. So they're usually good salespeople or good entrepreneurs because they're willing to do what it takes to be successful. And I was recounting my experience of all these things I had done. And I don't know if it was better or worse than his day, but he kind of looked at me and he's like, why are you telling me this? Because he's like, what are you talking about? It's like, I don't want to talk about this right now or whatever. He's like, why are you telling me this? It's like, oh, like, I just want to make sure like I'm doing everything right, And I realized I wanted validation, and then not prefacing things and realizing that you come off in a weird way, navigating those things while you're in school, going to make the world a difference when you're in a job interview, make the world a difference when you're trying to make your first sale at your new business, is people really understanding and buying into you and you being the best version of yourself, which I think we all can be. We all just get distracted, too often by the shiny object, we'll say, to where we forget that working on ourselves is actually the best investment that we could be doing. Because even if you're a 2, my wife is a 2.
So is my wife.
Funny enough. Yeah. That's hilarious. She's a 2. And so the hardest thing for her is to work on herself, to spend time breathing a little bit, because she wants to help people more than anything. And she wants to help so badly. But if you can get your mind around this, if you end up being a 2 or any other number on this Enneagram, when you develop yourself better, more holistically, you will accomplish your greatest desire 10 times better than you're currently doing it. Because the more inspirational she becomes, the better she understands herself, the better she's going to be able to help people who need her help, right? You say the right thing to them, do the right thing for them. And that goes for any single person, for what you want to accomplish. If you're developing yourself and growing into a better leader, that's the maximum use of your time is doing that, especially while you're in school.
Yeah. One other thing that I thought might be kind of helpful to share with people is, one of the pieces of advice I would really have too, and this is one of the pitfalls that I learned by not doing it correctly. But, now that I know it, it's something that I make a conscious effort of, but is to really, really have personal relationship with the people that you work with and the people that are important to you. Like one of the things, like everybody needs a good personal conference, right? Like, and I would say weekly, and that means like people that you work with, like don't just rely on being at the company meeting with them for, once every 2 weeks, like going, sit down, having a conversation with them, just one-on-one, knowing what's going on in their personal life. How's everything going with work? How are you doing? Really checking in on that person. In a marriage, it's absolutely critical. With your own kids, it's absolutely critical. Just the same way that, for the most part, pretty well with like friends and family, just checking in to see how they're doing. But professionally, having a personal relationship with people you work with goes a long, long ways. And it's amazing how much longer people will want to work with you when they feel like that you really care. And you're going to want to work with them the more that you know them and you kind of have built that relationship. And so I never forget. And one of the things that kind of started that for me was the how to win friends and influence people. And kind of to your point of like so many people, especially college age students, they talk about themselves a lot, right? And if you ever stop and think about, like if you were to ever listen to like an audio conversation of a group, like people generally are talking about themselves. And I remember one time sitting on an airplane, I was reading this book, How to Win Friends, Influence People. And I said, okay, let me just put this into practice. And so the whole time the person next to me, it was some older gentleman. And the whole time I'm just asking him questions about him. He never asked me one question about myself, which was fine. That was the whole point of it. And at the end, we're getting off the plane and he said, hey, I just wanted you to know that was one of the best conversations I've ever had. And it was hilarious because the whole time we're talking about him. Right. And even now I find that true of like when we're out at parties or events, like I'm asking people about themselves, and very rarely do people ever ask about me, which is fine, but it forms the habit and people really, really appreciate it because it's so rare that people actually ask someone how they're doing. And so if you're the person that does that, you're really going to build a network of people that like you and want to be around you. And if you're not in a conversation to pump your own ego and to help them, then again, you're going to be more fulfilled and experience more joy and happiness from that.
Yes. And you will gain more influence and people will want to work with you and do things with you.
Yeah.
That's a great book.
Yeah. Well, you have to put the ego aside because many times you want people to ask you about it. But then once you've done enough, you're like, you don't even notice it anymore that people don't even ask about you. I mean, even, it's funny. I have conversations with like my mom, she calls to check in on me and the whole time she talks about herself. Does that make sense? Like it's common that people do that. They call to see how you're doing. Meanwhile, they really want to talk about themselves. So if you give them the space to do that, right, they generally will.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. It is funny how much people, I do the same thing. It's just something you learn from some books that, most people I feel like don't learn. So that's a wonderful, wonderful habit. And by the way, if you don't learn this stuff, like culture's not going to be encouraging you to whatever you get out of school, most people go their whole lives without learning what we just talked about the How to Win Friends and Influence People, book where you allow people to talk. Most people don't learn who they are. If you ever heard of a midlife crisis, we'd like for you to avoid that. That happens when you realize you are someone you didn't think you were, because we all self-deceive in our minds of how great we are versus our flaws, and we try to cover those up with everything. So I highly encourage you to learn about yourself, to grow yourself, to do things that are hard, to build grit, in other words, right? So doing the hard things now will set you up for your future. I think maximizing your college experience, a lot of it comes with really developing yourself in as many ways as you can and putting yourself out there and talking to really cool people. And I would encourage people on here to meet people like Brian, or find a network of people who care about young people and try to learn from them too. So I think that'd be awesome. That's pretty awesome. So is there anything that you want to plug real quick?
No, check us out on YouTube as well, grit-org. We have like motivational videos, all of our podcasts, and more to come there as well.
Appreciate everybody. And of course, all of our links will be in the description, grit.org, all that kind of stuff, as well as all of our socials. So hopefully this was helpful to you. If you are interested in maximizing your college experience, we do invite you to come along the ride with me, Joe Ignace, and my co-host Nick, who couldn't be here on this podcast, but will be here in future episodes, to subscribe and follow us. Thanks so much.